So just 7 miles that way is a city. And no bias, it's probably the best city in the country. A city that is becoming, well, more modern, and they're finally knocking down all that concrete tat from the 1960s that makes you want to hurl up a pavement pizza. And that city is Birmingham. Now, Birmingham gets a bit of a bad reputation. It's awful, the people talk funny. But really, most of the people who say that it's rubbish have never been there, and the accent isn't as slow as it's made out to be. Maybe it's the Ozzy Osbourne effect. Jasper Carrott, Frank Skinner, Adrian Chiles, they all talk at a normal speed. It's also the city that birthed the likes of Murray Walker, Black Sabbath, ELO, Cadbury Chocolate, Frank Skinner, Jasper Carrott, Joe Lycett, Micah Richards, Richard Hammond, Duran Duran, UB40, Stevie Winwood, Nigel Mansell, sort of, Neville Chamberlain and Enoch Powell. Okay, forget the last two. But in the late 1980s and into the 1990s, the city of Birmingham was the host of an event that made it to national television and also got the approval of Mr. Eccleston himself. And that event was the Birmingham Super Prix. Now let's get one thing out of the way here. It wasn't exactly Monaco. Selly Oak doesn't give off the same vibe as Beau Rivage, and Perry Barr certainly doesn't give off the same nice feelings as Casino Square. Birmingham does have more canals than Venice, but even a half Brummie such as myself would struggle to try and somehow stat pad some extra glitz and glamour into the place. Now, the first proposals for racing on the streets of Birmingham were drawn up as early as 1966, but there were some problems in place regarding the holding of such events, and that issue was mainly the law. The reason why the British built places such as Brooklands and Silverstone and Brands Hatch wasn't so much to be the first place to build purpose-built racing facilities, it was because of the laws of the land, which prohibited racing on public roads, like they did in places like France and Belgium. When the British won the 1902 Gordon Bennett Trophy, the rules dictated that the 1903 race should be held in Britain, as they were the current winners. But because of the laws surrounding racing on the road specifically in England, the race was then held in Ireland because over there, even though the Republic of Ireland today was part of the United Kingdom, there were no such laws in place and the cars could go as fast as they wanted. And out of gratitude to the Irish hosts, the cars were painted green. And that's where British Racing Green comes from. It's also the reason why the now common rally special stage exists, because the British held the rallies on private farmland and private dirt tracks, which were exempt from the law. So, well, there you go. There's two things you might have learned here today, besides the Super Prix stuff. But back to Birmingham. The laws and local opposition kept working against the two people who were pushing for the event, these being Birmingham City Councillor Peter Barwell and local racing driver Martin Horn. Stirling Moss was able to get permission for a race to be held in the city for 1972, but it never went ahead. And in the background, Horn and Barwell were able to try and win the local council over by hosting black tie dinners and organising events where racing cars lined up on the streets, and also put some of these on display in the bullring in the centre of town. And Birmingham at the time was the centre of the UK car industry, along with Coventry. Over at Longbridge you had Austin, Morris, Rover and MG. Lanchesters were built in Sparkbrook, and Jaguar Land Rover still has its plant in Castle Bromwich, which was once used to produce Spitfires during World War II. So it made sense to potentially have a race on the street of what was basically England's Detroit. In 1984, the Birmingham Road Race Bill finally got presented to Parliament and was approved and signed off by the Queen in the October of 1985. This now made it fully legal for the council in Birmingham to close off the roads and hold a motor race with unrestricted speeds. The first proposed layout for the circuit through the Lee Bank Council estate, which, let's be honest, is still a racetrack whether it's legal or not, was blocked by the locals, and they instead moved the circuit closer to the city centre, with the start-finish being on the Bristol Road. The pits are still there today, funnily enough, and you can see them in their almost unaltered state. Now, if you look at it on Google Earth, or if you've driven past it, if you have been into Birmingham, you'll probably think, hang on, it's a car dealership. There's nothing here that looks like a pit complex. And you'd be right. The pits and the paddock were the forecourt of Bristol Street Motors Ford on the Bristol Road. From the Bristol Road, the cars made their way south and then turned left onto Belgrave Middleway, where even in the late 1980s, Formula 3000 cars, which became GP2 and now Formula 2, can hit up to 180 miles an hour, going the wrong way up the ring road. Now, the Belgrave Middleway has been in the news for the wrong reasons recently, as it was featured on a now famous episode of Ambulance on the BBC, where there was an absolutely horrendous crash involving a speeding car and a taxi back in 2018 or so. The cars would go the wrong way up Belgrave Middleway for a bit before using the next island at Belgrave Interchange as a chicane, the NGK chicane, and then blasting up the ring road further to the island at Hayden Circus, which is more commonly known as Halford's Corner, and the roundabout itself is still called Halford's Corner by the locals. Part of the island was flattened to straighten the entry and make it function as a hairpin, and the concrete barriers that made it into a proper roundabout when the circuit wasn't in use are still there, even today, after 36 years or so. The cars turned left at Halford's Corner and made their way back up the Middleway, passing Birmingham Central Mosque on the right, and then back towards that chicane I mentioned earlier that was made out of another roundabout, or island as we call them in the West Midlands. There, the cars went up the slip road and went right up Sherlock Street, another decent blast of speed, and then a kink to the left onto Pershaw Street, and then Bromsgrove Street that led the cars back onto the Bristol Road to complete the lap. And, as I found out while putting this together, the reason why the cars went the wrong way down the ring road was so that the general public wouldn't try to race the circuit when the track wasn't in use. But let's be honest, if you can do above 30 miles an hour today on the Belgrave Middleway, you deserve a medal. I mean, if you manage to get up to 32, just FIA needs to give you the Formula 1 World Championship. It's also why there is no footage of me actually getting off my arse and driving down it to show you what it looks like, because it would just be backwards. And driving over the back end of the circuit today in 2022, that's a solid no out of 10. The first race of the Super Prix was held on the 25th and 26th of July 1986, and almost a washout from the remains of Hurricane Charlie, being red flagged on the 24th lap of the scheduled 51. It was held again in 1987 all the way up until 1990, and on more than one occasion shared the bill with the British Touring Car Championship. It was also a race that was basically a who's who of late 80s up to mid 1990s racing. There is footage and pictures of Mark Blundell running up the Middleway in a Reynard chassis covered in purple and white Cadbury chocolate branding. Martin Brundle raced there in 1990 because of his Jaguar connections. Ivan Capelli raced, as did Eddie Irvine and Heinz-Harald Frentzen for Eddie Jordan Racing. Jean Alesi was on the grid. David Hunt, the brother of James, was involved in a massive shunt in 1988, and the pole sitter for the second race in 1988 was some Brazilian kid called Roberto Moreno. Yay, force me, man. However, it all ended after 1990, at the height of its popularity and reach. It basically ran out of money. There are rumours that there was some account fudging to make the books balance, and the 1990 race supposedly ran at a loss of £500,000. A local poll showed that 67% of Brummies and Black Country residents were still in favour of the race continuing, but when it cost the Birmingham taxpayer £5 million a throw just to host a race, it wasn't worth it. There is still a pocket of the Brummie population that would love to see the race come back, but realistically speaking, it probably isn't going to happen. The roads are falling apart, and just finding the money to improve the infrastructure would be very, very difficult in 2022, and even if you could find the money to build a new pit lane and pit complex and stuff, where would you put it? You probably wouldn't even be able to use the old original layout anymore because of the way that Birmingham has changed in the last 35-36 years. I mean, maybe they should just take it to the NEC and race in one of the car parks, Las Vegas style. And there are, full races on YouTube that you can watch throughout the years, and it definitely was a race of its time. But it did help in a way, because now they have actually changed the laws completely so that any city council, whether that's Birmingham, Newcastle, Sheffield, Coventry, wherever, can host their own races if they want to. But the truth is, that rule was only changed so that London could have its Formula 1 race when all of that was being talked about. And racing was supposed to return to the streets of Birmingham in the last 3 or 4 years or so. There was a big push to have Formula E on the streets around Millennium Point, the university, and what will become the new Curzon Street HS2 railway station, but it never came to fruition. Instead, they went back to London and the Excel Centre. Bloody typical. But anyway, this has been the story of how Britain's second city became the host of the UK's only street racing event, or only legal street racing event. If you've learned something new here today, or maybe you were one of the many thousands of Brummies that lined the streets to see Roberto Moreno in 1988, then do give the video a like. And if you want to see more stuff like this, then get subscribed, get the bell on as well, so you never miss out on a future video. Massive thanks to the kind folk at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help support me in the image buying department, you can do so by hitting the link in the description, where there's also links to Discord and my socials. Or there's the super thanks button under the video if you want to support on a one-off basis. So until next time, I've been Motherboard, have a cracking day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Ta-ra a bit.